We made one distress call, one for 4 people, and the humans sent 11,000 ships. I have spent the rest of my life trying to explain that number to people who weren't there, and I always fail, because the number isn't the point. The point is why. Why a species would send an entire war armada, the largest fleet assembled in a generation, to rescue 4 stranded aliens it had never met, on a world at the edge of nowhere that had nothing to offer in return. The galaxy spent years afterward trying to understand it, building theories, looking for the hidden motive, the secret strategic interest, the thing humanity really wanted. There was no hidden motive. That's the thing none of them could accept. The humans came because we called for help. That was all. That was the whole of it, and it terrified the galaxy more than any conquest ever could. My name is Telly's a Chinese letter, and I was one of the 4. Let me tell you what really happened on Shoal's End, the day the Deathworlders came. You have to understand what Deathworlder meant to us, because the word shaped everything we feared and everything we got wrong. The galaxy had a way of ranking worlds by how hard they were to live on. Most civilized species, mine included, the Veil, a gentle low-gravity people, came from kind worlds. Mild gravity, stable weather, abundant food, few predators. The galaxy's great civilizations had all risen from gentle cradles, because it's easier to build a civilization when your world isn't trying to kill you. That was the rule. Soft worlds make great peoples. And then there were the death worlds, the rare, terrible planets at the far end of the scale, high gravity, violent weather, lethal ecosystems, worlds where just existing was a daily war against the environment. The galaxy assumed death worlds couldn't produce civilizations at all. How could they? Anything that evolved on a world that hostile would spend all its energy just surviving, with nothing left over for art or science or the stars. Then humanity emerged from Earth, and the galaxy had to revise the rule, and it revised it in the worst possible direction. Because Earth was a death world, not the worst. There were a few that were technically harsher, but by galactic standards, Earth was a nightmare. High gravity that would crush most species. Wild, lethal weather. An ecosystem packed with things that could kill you, evolved over billions of years of relentless competition. And humans had risen from that, had spent their entire evolutionary history at war with the most hostile cradle in known space, and they'd come out of it as something the gentle galaxy had no framework for. Strong past belief, tough past reason, able to endure injuries, environments, and ordeals that would kill any civilized species instantly. And driven, relentless, in a way that the soft world species found genuinely frightening, because humans never seemed to know when to stop, never seemed to accept that a thing was impossible, never seemed to do the sensible thing and give up. The galaxy called them Deathworlders, and it meant it as a warning. Stay away from the Deathworlders. They are not like us. They survive things that should kill them, and they do not stop, and you do not want their attention for good or for ill, because there is no telling what a species forged on a world that hostile will do. Humanity had been part of the galactic community for 40 years, and in that time they'd done nothing aggressive, nothing threatening, and still the galaxy feared them on instinct, the way you fear a large predator that's being friendly. The friendliness doesn't quite cancel the size of the teeth. So when our survey team crashed on Shoal's End, and we sent out a distress call, and the only ones who answered were humans, I want you to understand that we were not relieved. We were terrified. Let me tell you about the 4 of us, and about Shoal's End, because the smallness of it matters against the size of what came. There were 4 Veil on that survey team. Me, Telly's, the team's environmental specialist. Old Marino, I keep wanting to borrow names from stories I haven't told. Let me be careful. There was our team leader, Sen, calm and careful, who'd led a dozen surveys without incident. There was Lyra, our pilot, young and brilliant. And there was Doro, our geologist, the oldest of us, who'd seen more of the galaxy than the rest of us combined. 4 Veil, a small scientific survey team, mapping a remote and useless world at the edge of the explored galaxy. Shoal's End was a hard world. Not a death world, nothing the galaxy considered survivable was as bad as a death world, but hard. Higher gravity than the Veil were built for. A thin, cold atmosphere, violent storms. We were there to survey it briefly from the safety of our ship and our environment suits and then leave. We were not built for a place like Shoal's End. The Veil are a gentle, low-gravity people. An hour outside our suits on that world would have crippled us, and a day would have killed us. We were visitors, fragile and careful, in a place that did not want us. And then our ship failed. A cascade fault, the kind that's rare and catastrophic. Our lander crippled, our communications damaged, our life support failing. The four of us stranded on a hard, cold world that was slowly killing us, with our supplies dwindling and no way to leave. We got one distress call out before the communications array gave its last one call, broadcast on the open galactic emergency band, the universal signal that means we are dying, please, anyone help. And then we waited, and we did the math, the four of us, huddled in our failing lander as the cold crept in. Shoal's End was remote. The nearest civilized worlds were far. By the time any rescue could reach us, if any came at all, our life support would be long dead. We were, by every calculation, already gone. We sent the call out of instinct, out of the refusal to die without trying, but we knew. For Veil, dying on a hard world at the edge of nowhere, too far from anyone to save. We were wrong about one thing. We weren't too far from everyone. There was a human deep range vessel, a single scout ship, closer to Shoal's End than any civilized world, far out on the edge of human exploration, alone in the deep. And it heard our call. One human ship, hearing four dying Veil on the emergency band. What that one ship did next is the thing the galaxy never understood. It didn't come to rescue us. That's the part that breaks people's expectations, and it's the heart of the whole story. The single human scout ship that heard our call did not turn and race to Shoal's End to save us itself. It couldn't. That was the cruel math of it. The human scout was a small vessel far out, and it had heard enough of our garbled call to understand our situation. For Veil, dying, life support failing, a hard world, a deadline measured in days. And the human scout ran the same calculation we had and reached the same answer. It could not reach us in time. Even racing at its best speed, the lone scout would arrive days after our life support died. By itself, it could do nothing but arrive to find four frozen bodies. So it did something else. Something that, when I finally understood it, changed how I think about humanity forever. The human scout ship relayed our distress call inward, boosted it, amplified it, threw it back toward human space with everything its transmitter had, and attached to it a single human assessment, a plain military evaluation of the situation. 4 sapients dying, hard world, life support failing, estimated time to total failure, limited. This vessel cannot reach them in time, requesting immediate response from any closer human asset. They will die without help. Recommend maximum effort. And then this is the part. The lone scout ship turned and raced toward Shoal's End anyway, knowing it would arrive too late, knowing it could do nothing alone. It went anyway because it could not do the math and then simply not go, because something in the human captain could not be the ship that heard 4 people dying and turned away, even when turning toward them was useless. So it went, useless, toward us, while it screamed for help behind it. And the help came. God, the help came. Here is what happened on the human side, which I pieced together later from human records, because it's the thing that explains the 11,000 ships. The relayed distress call, 4 dying aliens on a remote world, a human scout unable to reach them, recommend maximum effort, reached the nearest human military command. A border fleet command, a major one with real forces at its disposal. And the human officer who received it, a fleet admiral named Okonkwo, made a decision that the galaxy spent years trying to understand and never could. She sent everything. Not a rescue ship, not a small fast vessel suited to the task. Everything. The entire border fleet, 11,000 ships, the largest concentration of human military power in that sector, an armada built to fight a war. Admiral Okonkwo turned the whole thing around and sent it racing toward Shoal's End to rescue 4 stranded aliens. It made no military sense. It made no any kind of sense by galactic logic. You do not commit a war fleet to a rescue. You do not strip a border of its defenses to save 4 strangers of another species on a useless world. The cost was staggering, the fuel, the risk, the exposure of leaving a border undefended, the sheer disproportion of 11,000 warships for 4 civilian lives. By every rational calculation the galaxy understood, it was insane. And I have read Admiral Okonkwo's own account of why she did it, given later, when the galaxy demanded to know what humanity had really been after. And her explanation is the thing I want carved somewhere, because it's the truest thing anyone ever said about why the Deathworlders came. I didn't send the fleet because it was rational, she said. It wasn't. I sent the fleet because we didn't know what would be enough. 4 people were dying on a hard world, and we didn't know exactly what it would take to save them. What the conditions were, what the obstacles were, whether a small ship could do it or whether it would take heavy lift, medical capacity, environmental engineering, security, all of it. We didn't know. And when you don't know what it'll take to save someone, and you have the power to send everything, you send everything, because the one thing you cannot do, the one thing that is not survivable, as a person, as a species, is send too little and arrive to find you could have saved them if you'd only brought more. I would rather send 11,000 ships and need 4 than send 4 and need 11,000. The cost of too much is fuel and embarrassment. The cost of too little is 4 people dead who didn't have to be. That math is not close. It has never been close. You send everything and you sort out the excess when they're safe. You send everything and you sort out the excess when they're safe. That was the human logic. That was the thing the galaxy could not comprehend. A species that, faced with 4 dying strangers, did not calculate the minimum required to maybe save them, but sent its entire strength because too much was a cost it could pay, and too little was a cost it could not live with. The Deathworlders heard 4 people call for help, and they came with an armada, because they could not bear the chance of arriving with too little. I want to tell you what it was like on Shoal's End in the failing lander when the armada arrived, because we didn't know any of this yet. We didn't know about the lone scout, or the relay, or Admiral Okonkwo, or the 11,000 ships. We knew only that we were dying, the 4 of us in the cold, our life support down to its last hours, our hope long gone. Doro, our old geologist, was the one watching the sky. He'd insisted on it, kept one of us always watching the sky through the lander's cracked viewport, on the chance that something would come, even though we all knew nothing could come in time. It was his way of refusing to give up, and we let him have it because what else was there? And it was Doro who saw them arrive. And I will never forget the sound he made. Not a word, just a sound I'd never heard an old, calm Vale make, a sound of pure disbelief. And we all crowded to the viewport, the 4 of us dying, and we looked up at the sky of Shoal's End. And the sky was full of ships. Not a ship, not a rescue vessel. The sky was full of ships, more ships than I had ever seen, more ships than I had known existed in one place. A vast armada dropping out of the dark above a useless world at the edge of nowhere. 11,000 human vessels arriving all at once to rescue 4 dying Vale. The sky of Shoal's End, which had been empty and cold and indifferent for the whole of our dying, was suddenly full of the largest fleet any of us had ever seen, full of the Deathworlders, full of rescue on a scale that made no sense at all. And our first reaction, I have to be honest, our first reaction was not relief. It was terror, because we were 4 Vale and the galaxy had taught us to fear the Deathworlders, and we looked up at a war armada filling the sky of the world we were dying on, and we thought, this is an invasion. This is a fleet. We called for help and a war fleet has come, And whatever this is, it is not a rescue, because no one sends a war fleet to rescue 4 people. We are about to learn what the Deathworlders really are. We were right that we were about to learn what the Deathworlders really were. We were wrong about what that was. The first human to reach us came down through the storm, and I want to tell you about the storm, because it's the thing that made me finally understand what we'd been so afraid of, and why the fear had been pointed in exactly the wrong direction. Shoals End was in the middle of one of its violent weather events when the Armada arrived, the kind of storm that kept us pinned in our lander, that no veil could have survived outside for more than minutes, winds that could throw you off your feet and cold that could stop your heart. We'd watched that storm rage for 2 days helpless, and it was part of why we'd given up. Even if a rescue came, how would it reach us through that? The humans came down through it like it wasn't there. A single dropship detached from the Armada and descended into the storm, into winds that our instruments said should have torn it apart, through cold and chaos that no civilized rescue craft would have attempted, and it landed hard, 100 meters from our crippled lander, in the worst weather Shoals End could produce. And the ramp came down and figures came out into the storm. Into it. On foot. Walking through winds that would have killed any of us, in suits that were clearly built for it, moving toward our lander with the unhurried purpose of beings to whom this lethal storm was merely weather. That was the first moment the fear started to turn into something else. Because we'd been taught that the Deathworlders were terrifying, strong, relentless, forged on a world that bred killers. And here they were, the Deathworlders, walking through a storm that would kill us, exactly as terrifying as promised. But they weren't walking toward us as killers. They were walking toward us as rescuers, through a storm that should have stopped any rescue, because they were the kind of creature a Deathworld makes. The kind that walks into lethal conditions without flinching, that doesn't accept that a thing is impossible, that comes through the storm because someone on the other side of it is dying. The exact same traits the galaxy feared, pointed at saving us. The lead human reached our lander, and worked the damaged airlock open from outside with a strength that didn't seem to notice the cold, and came into our failing little shelter, and pulled off their storm helmet. And I saw a human face for the first time, and I'd been told to fear it, and I looked at it, and what I saw was not a killer. It was a young woman, soaked and wind-burned, and she looked around at the 4 of us, 4 dying Veil, fragile and frozen and terrified, and her face did a thing I didn't have a word for then but understand now. It crumpled with relief. Relief. She'd come through a killing storm to a crippled lander not knowing if she'd find survivors or bodies, and she found us alive, and her whole face flooded with the relief of it. And the first thing she said, before anything else, before any official greeting, in a voice rough with the cold and the worry, was, "You're alive. Oh, thank God, you're alive. We've got you now. You're going to be okay. We've got you. We've got you." The first words a human ever said to me. Through a storm that should have killed her, to 4 strangers of a species she'd never met, on a useless world at the edge of nowhere. We've got you. And I understood in that moment that the galaxy had been afraid of the wrong thing all along. The rescue itself was the most overwhelming thing I have ever experienced, and not because it was difficult, because it was so total. We'd imagined, in our most hopeful moments, a rescue ship arriving, taking us aboard, getting us out. What actually happened was that 11,000 ships worth of human capability descended on the problem of 4 dying Veil, and solved it so completely, so thoroughly, with such absurd, overwhelming, excessive care, that it short-circuited every expectation we had about how much a rescue could be. They didn't just take us aboard. They brought a full medical team, specialists, somehow already briefed on Veil physiology, who'd spent the journey learning everything human databases held about our species so they'd be ready. They didn't just stabilize us. They had environmental engineers reconstruct a Veil-appropriate environment aboard their ship within hours, low gravity and warm, thin air, and everything our fragile bodies needed, built from scratch by people who decided that 4 rescued aliens shouldn't have to spend one moment uncomfortable on top of everything they'd survived. They had counselors. I didn't even understand the concept at first, beings whose entire job was to help us with the fear, the trauma, the shock of nearly dying, because the humans understood that being rescued isn't only a physical problem. They had brought in that armada every conceivable capability that 4 rescued strangers could possibly need, because they hadn't known what we'd need, and so they'd brought everything. And now they deployed all of it, overwhelmingly, on 4 small, fragile people who had expected to die alone. Sen, our team leader, asked the question that was in all our minds, once we were safe and warm and beginning to understand that we were actually going to live. He asked the young woman who'd come through the storm, her name was Lieutenant Sarah Voss. He asked her carefully, why? Why all of this? Why 11,000 ships? Why an armada, a war fleet for 4 Vale? What did humanity want? And Lieutenant Voss looked genuinely confused by the question, not evasive, confused. Like she didn't understand what was being asked. Want, she said, we don't want anything, you called for help. But Sen struggled with it. An entire armada, the cost, the risk. For 4 people you've never met who can give you nothing in return, there must be a reason, a strategic interest, something. And Lieutenant Voss understood then what was being asked, and her face did something complicated. A kind of sadness, I came to realize, a sadness at what the question revealed about the galaxy we came from. You're asking what we get out of saving you, she said slowly. And I think the answer is going to be hard for you to believe because of where you're from. But the honest answer is, nothing. We don't get anything out of it. There's no strategic interest. There's no hidden plan. You called for help and you were dying and we could help, so we did. That's the whole reason, that's the only reason, she paused. I think in your part of the galaxy, help has a price. Rescue is a transaction. Nobody sends an armada for 4 strangers unless they're getting something. And I'm sorry that's the galaxy you come from, but it's not ours. Where we come from, on the world that made us, the one your people call a death world, we learned something different. We learned that on a world that's always trying to kill you, the only way anyone survives is if everyone helps everyone, all the time, without keeping score. A death world doesn't make you cruel. That's what the galaxy never understood about us. It makes you the opposite of cruel. Because we come from a place so hard that we learned, in our bones, that you do not leave people to die if you can possibly save them, not strangers, not enemies, not anyone, because on a world like ours, the day you start leaving people to die is the day everybody dies. We didn't come for a reason. We came because you called, and that's reason enough. And where we're from, it's the only reason that's ever needed. This is the thing I most want to convey, because it's the heart of the whole story, the thing the galaxy got exactly backwards. The galaxy feared the Deathworlders because it assumed a hostile world breeds hostile creatures. Hard world, hard people. A planet that's always trying to kill you must produce things that are good at killing, strong, relentless, dangerous. And the galaxy was right about the strong and relentless and dangerous part. Humans were all of those things. Lieutenant Voss had walked through a storm that would have killed any of us. The armada in the sky could have leveled a civilization. But the galaxy was catastrophically wrong about what that hardness produced inside. It assumed Deathworld hard meant Deathworld cruel, and the opposite was true. Because a world that's always trying to kill you teaches a lesson the gentle worlds never had to learn, that survival is collective. That on a planet hard enough, no individual survives alone, and the only thing that gets anyone through is the absolute, unbreakable commitment to never leave anyone behind. Because the moment a species on a death world starts abandoning its weak, it's lost. It's dying, that species dies. Because everyone is weak and lost and dying eventually, and a people who abandon each other on a hostile world don't last. The death world had forged humanity into the strongest, toughest, most relentless species in the galaxy, and it had forged them in the same fire, into the species least able to leave someone to die. The two things were the same thing. The strength and the compassion came from the same source. A world so hard that the only way to survive it was together fiercely, without keeping score. The galaxy looked at humanity's strength and feared what it would do. It never understood that the same forge that made them strong made them kind, a hard, fierce, relentless kind, a kindness that walks through killing storms and sends entire armadas. But kindness all the same, maybe the deepest kindness the galaxy had ever produced, precisely because it had been forged in the hardest place. We called for rescue, and the Deathworlders came with an armada, and the galaxy saw a war fleet and trembled. But it wasn't a war fleet, not really. It was 11,000 ships worth of we don't leave people to die, delivered to 4 strangers on a useless world, by the species the galaxy had been most afraid of, for exactly the wrong reason. But the story doesn't end with the rescue, and this is where it became something bigger than 4 saved lives, because the Armada's arrival had been seen. Shoal's End was at the edge of explored space, but it wasn't entirely unwatched. There was another power in that region, the Concordat, a coalition of gentle old species, the kind of established galactic civilization that the Veil belonged to, that most of the soft world peoples belonged to. And the Concordat had sensors on the edge of that space, and those sensors had detected the human armada, 11,000 warships, appearing suddenly, dropping into a remote system in force. And the Concordat reacted exactly the way the galaxy's fear of Deathworlders had trained it to react. It saw 11,000 human warships appear without warning at the edge of its space, and it concluded the only thing the galaxy's assumptions allowed it to conclude: invasion. The Deathworlders were attacking. The thing everyone had always feared, the moment the dangerous, relentless, terrifying humans finally turned their strength against the gentle galaxy, had come. An armada had appeared, and armadas mean war, and the Concordat began, in terror, to mobilize its own fleets, to prepare for the human invasion it was certain had just begun. The galaxy was about to go to war with humanity over a rescue, over 4 saved Veil. Because 11,000 ships sent to save 4 strangers looked, to a galaxy that couldn't conceive of such a thing, exactly like 11,000 ships sent to conquer. The Deathworlders' overwhelming compassion was about to be mistaken for overwhelming aggression, and the mistake was about to start the very war the galaxy had always feared. And the 4 of us, 4 rescued Veil, aboard a human ship, alive because of an armada the galaxy was now mobilizing against, we were the only ones who knew the truth. We were the only beings in the galaxy who had seen, with our own eyes, what the Armada actually was. We'd been told to fear the Deathworlders, and we'd learned, through a storm and a rescue and We've Got You, that the fear was pointed exactly wrong. And now our own people, the gentle Concordat, the soft-world galaxy we came from, was about to go to war with the species that had just saved our lives, over a misunderstanding only we could correct. Admiral Okonkwo understood the danger the moment the Concordat began to mobilize. I was there when she understood it. They'd brought us to her flagship, the 4 of us, honored guests, and she was receiving the reports of the Concordat's mobilization with a grim face. "They think we're invading," she said. "Of course they do. We showed up with 11,000 ships. From their side it looks like exactly that." She turned to us, to me, to Sen, to Lyra and Doro, the 4 small Veil aboard her enormous warship. "I'm not going to fight them. I want that clear. We did not come all this way to save 4 people only to slaughter 400 billion in a war of misunderstanding, but I can't make them believe it's a rescue. They won't believe a human admiral who says, 'We only came to help.' That's exactly what an invader would say. The word of the Deathworlders means nothing to them right now. Their fear has already written the story, and it's a story of conquest." She looked at us steadily. "But they might believe you, 4 of their own. 4 Veil who were actually here, who actually saw what this armada is, who are alive because of it. You're the only witnesses in the galaxy who can tell the Concordat the truth in a voice they'll trust. So I have to ask you something and you can refuse and I'll understand. She paused. Will you speak for us? Will you tell your people what really happened on Shoal's End? That the Deathworlders came with an armada not to conquer, but to rescue 4 of their own. Because if you don't, if no one they trust tells them the truth, then this rescue is going to start the largest war the galaxy has ever seen, and 4 saved lives are going to cost 400 billion, and the Deathworlders are going to be remembered as exactly the monsters everyone feared, when the truth is the exact opposite. We agreed to speak. Of course we agreed. We were 4 small Vale who had just learned that everything our gentle galaxy believed about the Deathworlders was wrong, and now that wrongness was about to start a war that would kill billions, and we were the only ones who could tell the truth in a voice the galaxy would trust. There was never really a choice. The choice had been made for us the moment Lieutenant Voss came through the storm and said, "We've got you." But agreeing to speak and being believed were different things, and the gap between them nearly killed us all. Because here's the problem, and it's the same problem that runs through this whole story. The Concordat's fear had already written the story, and a frightened mind does not easily unwrite a story. When we transmitted our message to the Concordat, 4 rescued Vale, alive and safe aboard the human flagship, telling our own people that the Armada was a rescue and not an invasion, the Concordat's first response was not relief. It was suspicion. Because of course it was. 4 Vale aboard a human warship telling the Concordat not to fear the humans. What did that look like to a frightened galaxy? It looked like hostages. Cursed. Prisoners made to read a script, telling their own people to lower their guard so the invasion could proceed. The Deathworlders had captured 4 Vale and were now using them to disarm the Concordat's defenses. The fear didn't just reject our truth. It absorbed our truth and turned it into more evidence of the threat. I watched our message fail. I watched the Concordat look at 4 of its own people, alive and pleading, and conclude that we'd been broken, used, turned into tools of the enemy. And I understood the terrible trap of it. That fear, once it has decided what a thing is, can twist every piece of evidence to fit, even the evidence that should free it. The harder we insisted the Armada was a rescue, the more it looked like coercion. There was no version of the message that fear couldn't absorb. And the Concordat fleets kept mobilizing, and the war kept coming, and 4 saved lives were about to cost 400 billion, and our truth wasn't enough, because the truth is never enough against a fear that's already made up its mind. It was old Darrow who found the way through. Darrow, our geologist, the oldest of us, who'd seen more of the galaxy than the rest of us combined. And what he understood was the thing that finally ended it. "We're trying to argue them out of their fear," Darrow said, aboard the flagship as our messages kept failing and the fleets kept gathering. "And you can't argue someone out of fear. Fear isn't a conclusion you reach by reasoning. It's a thing you feel, and it bends all your reasoning to fit. They're afraid of the Deathworlders, and so everything we say becomes evidence that the Deathworlders are to be feared. We could talk forever and never reach them." He turned to Admiral Okonkwo. "But fear can be unmade. Not by argument, by demonstration, by showing them undeniably a thing that fear cannot absorb." He paused. "The Concordat is mobilizing for war. They're bringing their fleets to the edge of this space, expecting the Deathworlder Armada to attack. They are braced completely for aggression. Every instinct, every sensor, every expectation pointed at the moment the humans open fire." His old eyes were sharp. "So don't open fire. Do the opposite. Do the one thing that fear has no defense against, the one thing an invader would never do, the one thing that cannot be twisted into evidence of threat." He looked at the Admiral. "Disarm. Stand down. Power down your weapons, the entire Armada, all 11,000 ships in full view of the Concordat fleets, and then leave. Turn the Armada around and withdraw, slowly, openly, weapons cold, having taken nothing, having harmed no one, having come only to rescue 4 people, and now going home with them safe. Show them an Armada that came in force and leaves in peace. Because a frightened mind can twist words into threats and hostages into coercion, but it cannot twist a disarmed fleet withdrawing into an attack. There's no story fear can tell about 11,000 warships powering down their weapons and going home. The only story that fits that is the true one, that they never came to fight at all. Admiral Okonkwo considered it. It was a risk, disarming a fleet in front of a mobilizing enemy, making 11,000 ships vulnerable on the bet that the gesture would be understood. If the Concordat attacked anyway, in that disarmed moment, it would be a slaughter. "You're asking me to bare the fleet's throat to a frightened enemy," she said quietly, "and trust that the enemy understands the gesture before they take the opening." "I'm asking you to do the human thing," Doro said. "The thing you did for us. When you didn't know what it would take to save 4 strangers, you didn't calculate the minimum and protect yourselves. You sent everything and made yourselves vulnerable because the cost of too little was worse than the cost of exposure. This is the same choice. The minimum risk move is to keep your weapons hot and hope to talk them down. But that won't work. Fear will twist it. The thing that actually works is the vulnerable thing, to disarm, to expose yourself, to trust the gesture. You already proved you'd take that kind of risk for 4 lives. Take it now for 400 billion. He almost smiled. Be the Deathworlders the galaxy should have understood you to be, not the ones who come in force to conquer, the ones who come in force to help, and prove it by laying the force down the moment it's no longer needed. Admiral Okonkwo gave the order, and humanity did the thing that ended the war before it began, the thing that, in the end, taught the galaxy what the Deathworlders actually were. 11,000 human warships, arrayed at the edge of Concordat space, expected by a terrified galaxy to open fire at any moment. 11,000 warships powered down their weapons. All at once, in full view of the Concordat fleets. Weapons cold, shields lowered, the entire armada going visibly, deliberately vulnerable, baring its throat to an enemy braced to kill it. And then, slowly, openly, the armada began to withdraw, turning away from Concordat space, beginning the long journey home, having taken nothing, having fired nothing, having come all that way only to rescue 4 Vale who now rode home safe among them. And the Concordat watched this, and the fear that had twisted every word, that had turned our pleas into evidence of coercion, that had been about to start a war, the fear met a thing it could not twist. Because there is no story you can tell about a disarmed fleet withdrawing in peace except the true one. An invader does not power down its weapons in front of you. An invader does not bare its throat and leave. The Concordat's fear had been built on the certainty that the Armada came to conquer, and the Armada had just done the one thing a conqueror never does, undeniably, in full view, and the fear had nowhere left to go. And in that gap, in the moment when the fear finally cracked, when the Concordat watched 11,000 warships choose vulnerability and peace, that was when our message finally landed. Our truth that had failed against the fear suddenly fit the evidence. 4 rescued Vale, telling the galaxy the Armada came to help, and now an Armada visibly proving it, disarming and withdrawing. The words and the demonstration together. The truth, finally, with nothing left to twist it. The Concordat stood down. The war that would have killed 400 billion did not happen. And the galaxy, for the first time, looked at the Deathworlders and saw not the monsters it had feared, but something it had never had a framework for. The strongest species in the galaxy, arrived in overwhelming force, choosing to lay that force down rather than spend a single life it didn't have to. The Deathworlders who could have conquered, choosing instead to rescue and to withdraw. The thing the galaxy was most afraid of, revealing itself to be the thing the galaxy most needed. I'm old now telling this, older than Doro was that day on the flagship. The 4 of us lived long lives after Shoal's end, and we spent them, all 4, doing the one thing we felt we owed, telling the truth about the Deathworlders to a galaxy that had feared them for exactly the wrong reasons. We became, the 4 of us, the witnesses, the Vale who were there, the ones who'd been dying on a hard world and watched the sky fill with an armada and learned, through a storm and a rescue and a fleet that disarmed itself, what humanity actually was. The galaxy changed after Shoal's end. Not all at once fear that old doesn't die in a day. But it changed. Because the story got out, the true one, the one the four of us spent our lives telling, that the Deathworlders called terrifying had heard 4 strangers dying and sent everything they had. And then, when their overwhelming strength was mistaken for aggression, had laid that strength down rather than fight. The galaxy had spent so long afraid of human strength that it had never asked the only question that mattered. What is the strength for? And Shoal's End answered it. Human strength was for walking through killing storms to reach the dying, for sending armadas when you didn't know what it would take, for laying down your weapons in front of a frightened enemy because 400 billion lives were worth the risk. The Deathworld had forged the strongest species in the galaxy, and forged it, in the same fire, into the species that used its strength to save. People ask me, sometimes, the young ones, who grew up in the galaxy Shoal's End made, who know the Deathworlders as friends and protectors and never knew the old fear, they ask me what it was like, the day the Armada came. And they expect, I think, a story about terror, about the overwhelming might of it, about 4 small Veil dwarfed by 11,000 warships. And I tell them it wasn't about the might at all. The might was real, yes, 11,000 ships, the strongest species in the galaxy, but the might was never the point. The point was a young woman who came through a storm that should have killed her and pulled off her helmet and said, "Before anything else, we've got you." The point was an admiral who sent everything because the cost of too little was 4 people dead who didn't have to be. The point was a species so strong it could have ruled the galaxy, choosing instead to lay its strength down rather than spend one life it didn't need to spend. We called for rescue. 4 small voices, dying on a useless world at the edge of nowhere, expecting no one. And the Deathworlders came with an entire armada, and the galaxy trembled, certain it was watching the beginning of a conquest. It was watching the opposite. It was watching the truest thing the Deathworlders ever did arrive in overwhelming force for 4 strangers, and then prove, by laying that force down, that the strength was never for conquest at all. The galaxy feared the Deathworlders because they were strong. It never understood until Shoal's End what they were strong for. They were strong so that when 4 strangers called for help from a dying world, there would be someone in the galaxy powerful enough, and relentless enough and kind enough, to send everything, and gentle enough in the end, to lay it all down. That's what arrived in the sky of Shoal's End, the day we called for rescue. Not an armada, the answer to the only question the galaxy never thought to ask. The galaxy feared the Deathworlders for their strength. It never asked what the strength was for until 4 dying strangers called for help and got an entire armada, and then watched it lay itself down.